Hey everybody, welcome to Solo's webinar. We hold these webinars weekly every Wednesday, and in these webinars we like to answer your questions about debt. So we are really excited to get started today and respond to your questions. Today's topic is specifically how to settle debt with a Sunrise debt collector. So if you are watching, please go ahead and submit your questions to the chat. And yeah, we're going to get to those in just a moment. But before we do that, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Hannah Locklear. I've worked at Solo for 4 years now. And it's been a wild ride and a wonderful journey. And our mission at Solo is to help people resolve debt. So whether you've been sued for debt or you've just been contacted by a debt collector initially, we can help you negotiate and settle outside of a court setting. Or if you've been sued, we can help you respond to the lawsuit and buy yourself time to work out settlement outside of court. We have all sorts of services and products that can assist you if you've been sued. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk a little bit about Sunrise debt collectors today specifically. But if you're being contacted by any other type of debt collector or company, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat and I'll do my best to respond to them. And before I get started, I also wanted to just give a quick disclaimer that while Solo does help with legal services and we do provide legal services, I am not an attorney. So any advice or information that I share during this webinar is not legal advice or legal counsel. In order to receive that type of advice, you would need to hire an attorney. So anything I say in this webinar does not constitute as legal advice for you in your case. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, with that, I wanted to go ahead and just get started on the topic of how to settle with a Sunrise debt collector. So the first question I wanted to answer, which is a very common question specifically related to Sunrise debt collectors, is Sunrise a legit debt collector? And the answer is yes. So Sunrise is a debt collector that's been around since the 1970s, I believe. They partner with banks, creditors, financial institutions to help collect debt. I'm actually going to drop a link in the chat that is an article all about Sunrise debt collection. The official title of the company is Sunrise Credit Services. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about this company in general. But to answer the question, is Sunrise Credit Services legit? Yes, it is a legit debt collector. That doesn't mean that you may be contacted. That doesn't mean that you won't be contacted by a collector that is posing as Sunrise Credit Services. This happens sometimes. Scammers will pretend to be debt collectors and try to, steal your financial information. So before you engage with any sort of debt collector, it's always really smart to be aware and educate yourself on debt collection before you give out your information. And most times when a debt collector calls you, they'll actually have your information already. So if you get a phone call and they're asking you for your social security number, it's probably not a good idea to disclose that information unless you're absolutely certain that it is the debt collector and you're trying to work out a resolution with them. So that being said, as I mentioned before, Sunrise Credit Services has been around since the 1970s. It's a huge debt collection agency, and some of the companies that Sunrise Credit Services collects for are AT&T, Bank of America, Charter Communications, Comcast, Con Edison, Optimum, Publishers Clearing House, Spectrum, Sprint, Teachers Federal Credit Union, Xfinity. So you can see that the type of financial institutions that Sunrise collects for varies. They collect for telecommunications companies, they collect for banks, they collect for credit unions, etc. So if you owe money to any sort of institution like this, you may be contacted by a Sunrise debt collector, and they may try to get you to pay off the debt. So some quick tips on how to settle debt with a Sunrise debt collector. If you've been sued by a debt collector, the number one thing that you should do is file an answer to the lawsuit. You should file a written answer before your state's deadline. Now, every state has a different deadline. It can range anywhere from 14 days to 35 days, depending on where you live. So do your research, figure out what the deadline is in your state, and be sure to file an answer before your deadline to avoid default judgment. Default judgment can lead to big consequences like wage garnishment or liens on your property. So that's why it's really important to just file an answer to avoid that automatic judgment. Once you've filed an answer, you should determine how much that you can actually afford. And we actually have a helpful formula that could help you determine how much you might be able to realistically afford to offer to settle the debt. I'm dropping that formula in the chat, but basically it's the amount that you have available to settle equals your monthly income minus your monthly costs plus your savings. So take a look at how much you make each month, your monthly income, subtract your monthly costs, or, this includes your rent, utilities, other credit card debts, other types of debt payments that you have to make, and then add any savings that you might have. And this will give you a realistic idea of how much you can actually afford to offer to settle a debt if you've been contacted about one. After you've determined how much you can realistically pay, make an offer. So you can contact Sunrise Credit Services directly to make an offer to settle the debt. You're definitely going to want to offer a little bit less than the maximum amount that you can afford to settle to start things off. Your offer should be realistic. You don't want to lowball them so much that they won't take you seriously, but definitely start a little bit lower than the actual full amount that you can afford, because this will give you some room to negotiate, and maybe you'll settle somewhere in between and still not have to pay the full amount that you can actually afford. And don't expect them to accept your first offer. So oftentimes when you're negotiating with debt collectors, it may take several rounds of negotiating. It may take a few phone calls, a few rounds of letters, etc., before you actually reach a settlement. So don't get discouraged if they don't accept your first offer. Don't get discouraged if they ask for the full amount after your first offer. If you can explain that you've reached, or that you've fallen on hard times, or maybe you have legitimate reasons for not paying off the debt, then oftentimes debt collectors will work with you, and they'll kind of be like the middleman between you and your creditor to try to find a resolution. You can also reach out directly to your creditor if you feel more comfortable doing that. And then lastly, once you get an agreement in writing, make sure to get it in writing. Nothing is official until it is signed, sealed, and delivered. So be sure that you get it in writing, that you sign it, that the debt collector signs it, or that your creditor signs it. And this will prevent any future legal issues that may arise if they try to claim that you still owe money on the debt. And then lastly, just make sure that whatever you agreed to settle for, make sure that you live up to your agreement. Because if you don't pay off as agreed, then they might not trust you in the future to come to another resolution. If something comes up and, maybe you're on a monthly payment plan with them and you've settled for less and you're, making your payments, and something comes up, contact them, be open and transparent about your situation. And oftentimes they will work with you. So yeah, that being said, next question I wanted to go over real fast is, how do I know if a Sunrise debt collector is a scam? So this is a great question because, like I said before, oftentimes scammers will try to pose as debt collectors to try to steal people's information. So a few ways that you can know for certain if you're being contacted by a scammer. Number one is just know Sunrise Credit Services contact information. I'm going to drop a link to their website right here below. And then I'm also going to add some information about their P.O. box address, as well as their phone number and their email address. So here I am dropping that in the chat. For those just listening, a common phone number that Sunrise Credit Services uses is 1-800-645-9824. Again, that's 1-800-645-9824. That is a legit phone number for Sunrise Credit Services. So if you're getting called from that number, you can assume that it's not a scam. Another email, or their email address that they would typically maybe contact you from, is collections@sunrisecreditservices.com. So if you get any sort of email with the ending at sunrisecreditservices.com, you can also assume that it's probably a legit collection. So those are some good ways, double check that their information, the information that they're contacting you from, matches what's on their website. And then, there are several things that you can do when you actually talk to a debt collector to ensure that they are who that they say they are, so that you can ensure that they are who they say they are. Number one is you can just ask them for their debt collection license and information. And if they hang up or start acting fishy, then that could be a good sign that the person you're talking to either isn't trained very well, or maybe they're not legit. Let's see. Next question I have is, how can I negotiate with Sunrise Credit Services to settle my debt for less? So like I said before, Most debt collectors are willing to work with you. Just like you and me, they're human beings. This is just a job that they probably work to try to make ends meet. And they're not all evil. They're not all out to get you and ruin your life. Like, they're just trying to do their job. And so, a few ways that you can negotiate. One of the most powerful things that you can do is just be transparent with where you're at in your financial situation. Again, if you've experienced some sort of life circumstance that's made it hard for you to pay your debts, maybe you've lost your job, maybe you've gone through a divorce or lost a loved one, like a spouse or a family member. Maybe you've gotten sick and you're not able to work right now. Maybe you had an accident, whatever it is that you're going through that's made it hard for you to keep up with your bills, just be transparent. Like, tell the Sunrise debt collector, this is what's happening. This is how much I can realistically afford. Can you work with me to get me on a payment plan that will actually work with my budget? Again, they're human beings and they will work with you. They may be very persistent, and some people may even call debt collectors aggressive at times. But again, it's their job. They're just trying to do their job. So if you can be transparent and open in your communications, it's going to make their job easier, but it's also going to make your life easier because you're going to have a better chance of reaching some sort of resolution when you're honest and open about your situation. Another negotiation tip, like I said before, once you've determined how much you can afford to actually settle, it's a really good idea to offer less than that. This will give you room to grow as you negotiate, and they'll give you a counter offer. You may give them a counter offer, and you may go back and forth for a bit before you reach a resolution. But if you start a little bit lower, then it's a good chance that you could still settle for less than the full amount, or for less than you can actually afford, which would help you save a lot of money. Now, the question of like, how much do people typically accept when negotiating, like how much would a debt collector accept to settle debt? That one is a little bit more complicated. Let's see, I'm gonna drop another resource in the chat, a link to a resource to help you with this question. One second. We have a blog with answers to all these types of questions. And we've also interviewed lots of attorneys who do this type of negotiating for a living on the consumer side, meaning they would represent people who are being contacted or sued by debt collectors. So we've interviewed a lot of people who have lots of experience with this type of negotiation. And on average, usually debt settlement is reached somewhere between like 40 to 80%. But typically it's good, in our experience talking with attorneys and lawyers who do this type of negotiation, it's good to start your offer at around 60% or less of the debt amount to start negotiations. So again, if you're being sued for $1,000, start at 60%, offer them $600 and see where things go from there. This is like a legitimate enough offer that they'll take you seriously, but it's still going to cut down some costs for you and help you save money. So I'm dropping a link to the chat right here. Hopefully that will be helpful. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the questions from the live chat here. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. And thank you for submitting your questions. I really hope that this helps. And starting here in a little bit, we're going to be trying to collect questions from, I guess, live audio. So we may be sending out an email inviting people to submit their questions via video or audio recordings, just to make this a little bit more personable. Instead of just reading out your questions over the chat, we'll kind of get a better chance to interact with you more deeply. But for now, I'll just be reading the questions from the chat. So thanks again for watching and submitting your questions. First question comes from Savage San. Hello there. It says, what does stipulation dismissal of complaint without prejudice mean during mid-negotiations of settlement, with the original creditor's attorney following after opposing to summary judgment with improper service? How does solo settle differ? Okay, so I'm going to break this down a little bit. So the first question was, what does a stipulation dismissal of complaint without prejudice mean? So it sounds like maybe the plaintiff or the person that's suing you filed a motion to dismiss without prejudice. And I'm going to also, again, I'm all about sharing these resources, so I'm going to go ahead and share a resource about what it means for a case to be dismissed without prejudice. Give me one moment while I pull that up. So whenever a case gets dismissed without prejudice, basically what this means is that it's been dismissed, but the same claim can be brought up in court again by the plaintiff. So maybe they don't have enough evidence in the moment to pursue the debt and to prove that the claim is true. So they're going to just go ahead and dismiss the case, move to dismiss it so that they, so that they don't automatically lose. And they're just basically going to say, we give up for now, but since it's dismissed without prejudice, we still have a chance to bring up the case in the future. So again, I'm going to drop a little link to a blog post that we shared about this topic, and hopefully, Savage San, this will help answer your question further. Let's see. I think you had a few more questions though. You said that the original creditor's attorney followed up after opposing to summary judgment with improper service. So it sounds like maybe they're claiming that you did not properly serve them with some sort of document. I'm not 100% sure about the details of your particular case, but I'll go ahead and drop another resource about improper service. Sometimes people use this as a defense in these types of cases to help kind of delay a case or drag it out a little bit longer. They'll say, I was never properly served, so I should get an extension, or the case should be dismissed because I was never actually properly notified that I was sued. So I'm going to go ahead and drop another link to a resource about improper service. And hopefully that can also help you point you in the right direction and help you find more answers to your questions. Let's see. All right. Dropping a link in the chat right now. All right, next question is from Kanisha. It says, can debt be negotiated when there's already a court-ordered judgment? Yes, actually. It's going to be much harder at this stage probably to settle a debt if there's already a judgment in place. But even after a judgment has been entered, debt collectors still have to jump through several hoops to be able to actually start collecting money. They have to contact your employer and go through the whole wage garnishment process, which they have to submit a lot of forms, do a lot of paperwork in order to get that actually started. So if you can contact them and try to negotiate and settle and just say, hey, I can pay off 80% of the debt today to just get this dismissed. Would you accept that instead of having to go to the trouble of garnishing my wages or putting liens on my property or whatever it may be? Oftentimes, debt collectors will accept this type of settlement. And this is information that I received directly from a debt collection attorney himself, Greg Anjuerden. He's one of our partners, actually, and he informed me recently that even after a judgment has been entered in a case, you can still negotiate and settle. It depends. At this point, again, it might not be super easy to settle for a lot less than the original amount, but it's not impossible, and you could still settle and save money. All right, next question is, let's see. I received a letter for a lawsuit for $5,800 from Wells Fargo, but they didn't send a summons or a complaint letter. What should I do, please? I already created an account with Solo. Okay, so it sounds like you've been sued for almost $6,000 by Wells Fargo. That's a big bank that often sues people for debt, but you didn't receive any court documents for it. So, number one, I'm not sure how you were notified that you got sued. I'm seeing another message from the same person. It says, the letter came from Brock and Scott, PLLC. I have until the 15th to reply as I was answering questions on Solo. They required that I make sure my letter says a complaint, but it did not. I'm in North Carolina. Okay, so it sounds like you're in North Carolina. You have until March 15th to respond. So you've got about 10 days, and it's Brock and Scott are the lawyers that are representing Wells Fargo. The number one thing that you need to do is just make sure that you respond to the lawsuit. Responding will give you time and even leverage to negotiate to settle outside of court. But it's the number one thing that you want to do is just engage. Don't ignore it. And I'm glad that you've already created an account with Solo to get through the process of starting to respond, because that's definitely the first thing that you always want to do. Respond, communicate, and don't ignore it. But it sounds like you're running into some issues with not having the complaint. So I would double check your court documents. Sometimes complaints are called different things in different states. Let me double check my records and see if there's a special name for summons and complaints in North Carolina. Give me 1 second. All right, so in North Carolina, oftentimes The complaint is called, let's see, it may be called a complaint on account. It's probably usually just called or titled a complaint. It could also be attached to the summons, but the way that you can know that a complaint is when it lists the specific claims against you. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can find an example of what a complaint might look like in North Carolina. And I'm also going to go ahead and drop a link to some online resources that you can use to find your court case information in North Carolina. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat right now. We have a blog post that will help you figure out how to check your case status. And if you don't have the complaint document, you can ask your court clerk to email it to you or to mail it to you so that you do have it and you will know how to properly respond to the lawsuit when using the solo dead answer document. Let's see. I was going to see if I could find an example of what a complaint in North Carolina looks like. Okay, so I do have some examples, but they're not redacted, so I can't share this information because it contains some private information from users. So I can't show exactly what they look like, but typically they'll just say complaint at the top of the document. So I'm sorry, I know that's not super duper helpful, but if you don't feel like you have your complaint with you in that stack of documents that you received, you can definitely call your court clerk and ask them to fax it to you or to email it to you. You would just need to give them your case number. So hopefully you have that information at least. But you'll definitely need your complaint to fill out your answer document because a part of the answer is responding to each of the claims that are listed in the complaint. You either have to accept, deny, or deny due to lack of knowledge. So there are 3 ways that you can typically respond. Again, you can accept it or admit it. You can deny it and say, prove it, or you can deny due to lack of knowledge, which is like saying, I don't know. All right, we're going to move on to the next question. This one's from Beautiful J. It says, the debt collector lawyer intentionally sent my summons to the wrong address, but I received my debt validation letter at my correct address. Now I have a default judgment and received a wage garnishment. Okay, so it sounds like you've been sued, but you were never properly served, and so you probably didn't get enough time to respond to the lawsuit, and I'm guessing that that is what led to the default judgment. So again, this just demonstrates the importance of making sure that you file an answer, because if you don't, you'll automatically lose by a default judgment. But it's not too late, luckily for you, Beautiful Jay, to still get things turned around. I'm going to share another resource about how to file a motion to vacate judgment. In some states, this motion is actually called a motion to dismiss judgment. But basically what this is it's a document that allows you to ask the court or the judge to reverse a judgment that's been entered in the case. And you can literally list that the reason that they should reverse the judgment is because you were never properly served. And if the court grants this, then you can actually get another chance to file your answer and go through the actual court process to work out a resolution. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat. If your wages are already being garnished, you might want to look into reporting it or appealing the wage garnishment. If you can tell me what state you're in, Beautiful Jay, that would actually be helpful because we have resources on all the 50 states on how to appeal a wage garnishment. You're asking also if this violates the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So while they do have to properly serve you, I wouldn't say that this is technically like a violation of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. If they intentionally sent your summons to the wrong address, now that's a different story, but you would have to like be able to prove that it was intentional, and that they like did it on purpose so that you wouldn't get to respond, and therefore they could file a default judgment against you. And that gets a little bit more tricky because, when you're trying to prove something, you have to have evidence. So I'm not 100% sure what type of evidence you could use to prove that. But yeah, I hope that answer kind of helps and that some other resources will point you in the right direction. Okay, we've got our next question from Fernando G. It says, I've been sued by LVNV funding. I answered to the summons through Solo, but I haven't heard back from them. I also tried to use Solo Settle, but the email of the plaintiff is not in the summons. Okay, Fernando. So, number one, great job responding to the lawsuit. That's the first thing that you have to do to avoid default judgment. So, great job there. Next steps, you'll definitely want to watch the status of your court case to make sure that you're not missing any important hearings or trials. You may consider looking into hiring an attorney depending on the amount that you're being sued for and if it's worth it to hire an attorney. But definitely you should watch the case status with the court. You can call the court to get the case status, or if you drop in the chat and tell me where you're being sued, which state you're in, I can share a resource that could help you check the status of your case online. But oftentimes when you file an answer, depending on where you live, maybe there will be like a pre-trial conference scheduled or some sort of a trial or hearing scheduled where basically you get to come together with the plaintiff and they'll try to help you reach a settlement before going through the whole entire trial process. So be sure that if any sort of court date or pre-trial conference is scheduled, that you attend, because if you don't, there is a chance you could have a default judgment or some other type of judgment entered against you. As for settling, sounds like you didn't have the email for the plaintiff. If you contact us at support@solosuit.com, this is our customer experience and customer support email address. We might be able to help you find the email based on your documents that you received. And we may already have an email on file for this particular plaintiff. So yeah, reach out to us at support@solosuit.com and we'll see what we can do to help you out further. Okay, next question is from Ramina. It says, I was sued by Mandarich. First trial date, they asked me for a discovery continuance. Second court date was on Monday. Mandarich was a no-show. Judge issued an order to show. Next court date is May. What should I expect? Okay, this is a great question. So a little bit of context. Mandarich Law is a big debt collection law firm. So they function as like attorneys, but they also have in-house debt collectors that they hire to like call people and try to settle or collect debts before actually going to court. So it sounds like you've already been to 2 court dates involving Mandarich, and they didn't show up to the second one. So the judge issued an order to show, and then you have another court date scheduled in May. So there are a lot of things that you can do to prepare for your court hearing. I'm going to go ahead and drop another link to a really good resource on how to prepare for court. Let's see. Don't mind my typing while I pull up this resource. I recently interviewed an attorney who is licensed to practice in the state of California. Her name is Sarah. And in this resource that I'm dropping in the chat for you, Ramina, she goes over tips and tricks for ways that you can prepare for your court date. So if you have a court date scheduled in May, this resource will be really helpful for you and help you know how to prepare. Just a couple quick tips that from this interview. You've got to understand the general process of what happens at court. So be sure that you prepare and have a thorough understanding of your own court case, especially the debt that they claim that you owe. And then, it sounds like you've already been to court a few times, but make sure that you know where to go, arrive early, and then wait for the judge. The judge will typically read off your case number, so you'll just need to be waiting for your case to be called, and then you can address the bench and, be very respectful, use proper language when you're talking to the judge, call them your honor, and then let them lead the hearing. And usually in these types of settings where there's like a judge involved and a plaintiff, the attorney, and then you, oftentimes the judge will try to lead the discussion and understand what's happening with the debt and see if they can help you guys find a resolution. And if not, if like neither party is going to budge, then the judge will ultimately have to make a ruling. So they will give you an option to like literally leave the courtroom and try to negotiate and come to an agreement before they actually make a ruling. So keep that in mind. But yeah, check out that resource and hopefully it's helpful. All right, let's see. We have several more questions. Thanks again, everyone, for watching tonight. I think I've got about 3 more minutes and then I'll have to hop off, but I'll go over, let's say, 3 more questions. And then again, if you have more questions about your debt or you're not sure what to do to respond, head over to our website, solosuit.com. You can also contact us at support@solosuit.com, and we will try to share resources and information that will point you in the right direction. All right, next question is from Margie. It says, while you can ask for the collection agency license number, please keep in mind that attorneys may be exempt from requirements to license. So it isn't necessarily a scam if a license isn't provided. This is great information. I think you're referring, Margie, to when I talked about how you can ask a Sunrise debt collector to give you like their collection license number to determine if they're a scam or not. Sunrise Credit Services is not an attorney. They are not a law firm. So they probably won't be exempt from being required to share their license and information. And if you press them for more information about who they are and where they're calling from, they won't be exempt from that because they are not attorneys. They are just debt collectors. So that's something to keep in mind for sure. Let's see. Doug S. says, is it possible to get a creditor to drop a lawsuit and forgive or discharge the debt if I explain that I'm in poor health, I have no income, no assets, and am dependent on family members? Or should I just file bankruptcy? So Doug, the answer is yes, it is possible to get your debt completely forgiven. Debts can be settled literally for 0% to anywhere from 0% to like 150%. In some cases, you might have to pay more than the original debt you owed because there will be like court costs, attorney fees, post-judgment interest added onto the original debt amount. But in some cases, if you have legitimate reason for not being able to pay off your debts, some creditors and debt collectors are known to completely forgive the debt because it's not worth it for them to continue to badger you, to continue to attempt collection efforts if there's no chance that they're going to get any money out of it. So if you can explain and like prove to them that you have real reasons for not being able to pay, like it sounds like you're having some health issues and you don't have any income or assets, and if you can prove this information with some documentation, they might just forgive your debt. So that is definitely possible. It is not unheard of, although I will say it's not super common. Let's see. We got a question from TR. It says, what happens if you can't make a payment after working on a repayment plan? Okay, I mentioned this earlier. If you've settled your debt and come up with like a payment plan where you're making monthly payments to a debt collector or to your creditor, great job. That's awesome to get back on track. If something happens that makes it hard for you to continue making that payment, the first thing you should do is contact the collector or the creditor that you're making the payment to and explain what's happening. Be super honest, transparent. Communication is key. And if you explain what's happening, typically they will work with you to find a resolution. Maybe they'll lower your monthly payment, or maybe they'll like give you a grace period to get things back on track so that you can get back to making your regular payments on time. But the number one thing that you need to do is just contact them and tell them what's going on. Be honest and open with your communications. You can also look into like other resources to help you with keeping up with your payment plan. So for example, like if you have any friends or family that could lend you some money in the meantime to just stay on top of your payments, you might consider those options. It's probably not a good idea to go into further debt to pay off your debt because debt can pile up very quickly. If you're super good at managing your debt, I suppose you could try it, but it's probably not what I would do or the best advice, I think, in terms of managing debt. You typically don't want to go into more debt to pay off an already existing debt. But if you have friends and family that might be able to work with you and help you out during a hard time, that's a good thing to do too. But yes, make sure that you communicate, be honest, and they will work with you. Let's see. Okay, we've got a question from Farah. This is the last question I think I will go ahead and do. But again, if you guys have more questions, please reach out to us at support@solosuit.com, dropping it in the chat so you can copy and paste it. That's our customer support email, and we would love to help point you in the right direction. So last question is from Farah. It says, when I called to settle my suit, the attorney for the creditor wanted income and expense info to qualify me to settle. Should I provide my personal information? So number one, just be sure that you're actually talking to the legit attorney. and you can, ask for their attorney license number or whatever. Just be sure that you're talking to the right person. Again, we want to avoid scams here, but I'm assuming that you are talking to the right person. With that being said, it is a good idea in many cases to provide documentation that show that you actually do qualify for debt settlement. So this might be, pay stubs or your like bank statements, just any financial information that will prove like, this is how much I actually have. This is how much I realistically can give you to settle. And in most cases, that type of documentation, if it does prove what you're saying, will help you reach a settlement. So yes, you can provide this information to attorneys, and I wouldn't be afraid to do so. It can be a really powerful way to help you move negotiations forward and come to a resolution. All right, so I think that's going to be it for me. Thank you again, everyone, for watching, and I really hope that I was able to answer some questions and get you guys pointed in the right direction. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link lastly to our website, solosuit.com. If you've been sued by a debt collector, or if you've been contacted by a debt collector, head on over to solosuit.com. We have a lot of resources that can help you respond to lawsuits and avoid default judgment. And this can also buy you time to negotiate. We have an online debt settlement negotiation tool. It's called Solo Settle. And it can help you negotiate with creditors and debt collectors through our online negotiation platform. And it'll help you protect your legal rights because we'll help you use all the proper legal protections and language that you need when negotiating. And it will also automate the process for you so that you don't have to wait on hold and wait on a long phone call or play phone tag with the debt collector or the attorney. It just automates the process and moves it all online so that it's less emotional. There's less friction. It's faster, and you don't have to, there's no limits on how much debt you have to owe. You don't have to be sued to use Solo Settle either. So if you've just been contacted by a debt collector, you can use Solo Settle to negotiate. And if you've been sued, you can still use Solo Settle to negotiate. But yeah, the number one thing to do if you've been sued is file the answer, communicate, don't ignore debt collectors, don't ignore debt collection lawsuits. Doing that will be the worst move that you could make. Just know that debt collection attorneys and debt collectors are willing to work with you. And I know that because I know personally debt collection attorneys who have done it, and they will oftentimes settle for less. So yeah, I hope that this helps. Head on over to our website and please reach out to us if you have any questions. We'll have another webinar next week, same time. And it'll be Wednesday evening. We'll have a guest speaker next week. So come and ask your questions about debt and get some more answers. But thanks so much everyone for watching. Just know that Solo is rooting for you. We want to help you find a resolution. So yeah, be proactive, take the next steps that you need to find that resolution. And